Bermuda was able to raise $1.35 billion. How much will the lower rate save the taxpayer?
The financing included a refinancing of certain existing tranches of debt. On the $500 million of tenders that we did, we'll save about $6 million on the $500 million of bonds. So we're actually refinancing, those bonds were tendered, so they'll be refinanced at a lower rate. And then on the credit facility, there was about $331 million of credit facilities with local banks. And that'll save about $3.6 million. So all told, in the area of $10 to $11 million of savings. Now, we did increase borrowing to an additional $520 million. And so the interest cost on that will actually result in an increase in interest expense of 3.
Based on your estimates, what will the deficits be for the next 3 years? And will the proceeds from these sales fund those deficits?
For the first quarter, the deficit was on the order of $101 million. My expectation for the next 3 quarters, I'm hopeful that there'll be an improvement in the deficit number, because we won't have the recurring nature of the one-time costs that we incurred with respect to certain COVID expenditures, PP&E, unemployment benefit, the embodiment of the regiment, quarantine facilities, and those kinds of costs that were one-time in nature. And in light of the fact that we have been able to keep the number of cases relatively small, the need to kind of shut down the economy has somewhat passed, unless we have an instance where there is some community spread. I'm hopeful that with the reopening of the economy, that we can have, while the economic activity is still not back at full speed, we can have somewhat smaller deficits because there is some degree of activity going on.
Do you have an estimate as to how much COVID-19 has cost?
We'd say year to date on the order of $90+ million for the government from an expense perspective. I think that those costs expand when you start to include the potential lost revenue. Our revenues for the first quarter were down by about $45 million. We did observe that most revenue lines were down. The upside was in payroll tax. So the result of, I guess, a good year for businesses that paid bonuses in the first calendar quarter. Those tax payments on those bonuses were due to the government on April the 15th, which is the second week of our first fiscal quarter. So we saw an uptick year over year in tax revenues from payroll tax. But all the other lines ostensibly were impacted by COVID-19.
When do you estimate there will be a balanced budget?
I was hopeful that we will be in the space of a balanced budget. Last year we had estimated about a $7 million surplus in my first budget. We back out the interest expense that we incurred on the facility that we undertook to buy the debt from the note holders on Morgan's Point. That was roughly about $7 or $8 million. So that helped to take us into negative territory. We were close. Projecting surpluses or deficits is more of an art than it is a science. My focus is on getting us moving in the right direction. Obviously, COVID-19 has thrown a wrench into the works of how this government will operate. And so we've taken some measures to try to contain the size of the forthcoming deficit. But that's a function of kind of what our experience will be as we navigate the next 9 to 10 months. So when we have a balanced budget, I can't say with any precision when that will happen, but I can tell you that my goal as the Minister of Finance is to work towards having us live within our means from a government perspective. We continue to look at finding ways of attracting more companies to base themselves here and to have people work from them. The focus has been on retaining those that are already here, encouraging them to grow their presence here, expanding operations in as best we can, and then inviting new companies and new industries